called You Are My Vision. We will see how God deals with our deeply ingrained prejudices by sometimes doing the miraculous to work in our hearts. So let's read from Acts chapter 10, verse 9 to 23. Please stand for the reading of the word. For those of you who are guests today, I teach the Bible verse by verse, and we're in the first third, finishing up the first third of the book of Acts at Acts chapter 10 today. Acts 10, verse 9. About noon, the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat. And while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. While Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. They called out and asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them." Peter went down and said to the men, "I am the one you're looking for. Why have you come?" The men replied, "We have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. A holy angel told him to ask you to come to his house so that he could hear what you have to say." Then Peter invited the men into the house to be his guests. That is the word of the Lord. Please be seated. If you're not familiar with the book of Acts, especially this portion, it may sound a little weird, and what is it all about? Well, I'll contextualize it for you. But the book of Acts is the story of the early church, the first church being formed, and how the gospel went out to all the nations. So I hope that you'll find this to be interesting. In 2018, the film Green Book took home the Academy Award for Best Picture. It told the true story of working-class Italian-American bouncer Tony Lip, who is hired as the driver for African-American classical pianist Don Shirley as he goes on tour in the Jim Crow South during the 60s. Green Book referred to a special guide that directed black travelers to safe motels and restaurants and gas stations that would serve them. The two don't get along due to their mutual racial prejudices, but by the end of the movie, in true Hollywood tradition, they become friends. In fact, they remained lifelong friends until 2013, when they both died just months apart. America at that time, as we all know, was divided into black and white camps. Back in ancient times, people were also divided into 2 camps, Greeks and barbarians. Barbarians were those who could not speak Greek, so to the Greek ear, everything they said sounded like barbar. Barbar, bar, bar, bar. Talk about prejudice. Aristotle believed the world's climate maintained those differences between the people. Those who lived in the cold lands of the north had much spirit and courage, but lacked skill and intelligence. In the warm south, people had plenty of skill and intelligence and culture, but little spirit and courage. Only Greeks lived in the right climate ordained by nature to produce perfectly blended character. Now, racial prejudice is a sad fact of living in a fallen world. It seems that every culture practices it to some extent or another. The Holocaust Museum has an entrance with one door marked prejudiced and the other not prejudiced. If you try to walk through the not prejudiced door, you will find that it is locked, and you have to go through the door marked prejudiced. Now, the Jews in Bible times also separated people into two camps, clean and unclean. Gentiles, non-Jews, us, unless you're Jewish, were considered unclean and defiled, and they were hated. Religious Jews would have nothing to do with Gentiles. They would not be a guest at a Gentile's home and would not invite a Gentile to be their guest for anything. Dirt from a Gentile country was considered defiled, so they would shake it off their feet before they entered back into Israel. They would not eat food prepared by the hands of Gentiles. If they purchased cooking utensils from Gentiles, they had to be purified before each use. Now, if you remember that kind of prejudice, go back to the book of Jonah. Jonah despised the Gentile Ninevites. God had called Jonah to preach the gospel of sorts to the Ninevites. And remember what Jonah did? He was so rebellious, he said no, and he gets swallowed by a great fish until he changes his mind. How many of you, metaphorically, have ever been swallowed by a great fish until you have changed your mind? Well, even when he finally obeyed God and preached to the Gentiles, the Ninevites, you know what the Ninevites had the nerve to do? They repented. They repented at his preaching. And Jonah was so angry, he was so mad that they repented. He wanted those Ninevites to be struck down. That's how ingrained his prejudice was. This is what makes Acts chapter 10 such a pivotal chapter in God's plan to get the gospel to the whole world. The Apostle Peter, a devout Jew who would never associate with anyone or anything unclean, is about to get a visit from unclean Gentiles. And not only that, these Gentiles were representatives of the hated Roman army. God knows how to twist the screw, doesn't he, a little bit to make his point. But Peter is the one God used to get the good news out first beyond the Jewish people, and from there all the way down through the centuries to us. If you are saved today, if you have given your life to Jesus Christ and are born again, we have Peter to thank for that. But he was only useful as God's vessel when he said, "Yes, Lord." Everyone hearing this message today should be very grateful, because this is truly God's amazing grace in action. Grace like rain fell down on the Gentiles. Verse 9 of Acts chapter 10. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. Last time that we spoke about this, we saw that a God-fearing and devout Roman centurion named Cornelius received a visit from an angel telling him to send some men to the city of Joppa to bring back a man named Peter. Okay, that's a lot of mumbo-jumbo there. But basically, a Roman centurion got a vision from God saying, just go meet this guy named Peter. You don't know who he is? Go do it. Why did he want to send a contingent of people to Peter? So he would hear the gospel. He was already God-fearing. God had already prepared his heart. He had a heart that was already inclined towards God. So God chose Cornelius to send his contingent to Peter to hear the good news. Providentially, not coincidentally, Peter just so happened to be praying as they were on their way over to the house of Simon the tanner. Cornelius, without hesitation, obeyed God and sent his two servants and a devout believer. And as they're on their way over, Peter just so happens to be praying. Providentially. Have you ever heard that word providentially or providence? Nothing in a Christian's life is coincidental, caused by luck, chance, or fate. God works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will, according to Ephesians 1:11. This is called the doctrine of divine providence. And everyone in here would benefit from understanding that doctrine. Never heard of it? It simply means that God is sovereign and directs everything the way he wants it to go because he is in control of everything. Do you believe God is in control of everything? Everything. But I'm sick, Lord. God's in control. But Lord, I hit a deer on the way to church and I was late. God is in control. A guy, Chris, right there, he said he hit a raccoon the other night, and he was so bummed. He thought he wrecked his new car, and he looked at it after he parked and found a little tuft of hair on the bumper, and nothing was damaged. God was in control. That didn't happen to me the 3 times I hit deer. One totaled my car. The other was in the shop for 2 months. And I don't know, the third one I hit with the school bus. Yeah, I was trying. I was going to get revenge. God is in control of all those things, as crazy as that sounds. Don't know why, but it causes us to trust in him more, to lean into him more, right? Y'all are here today because of God's providence. Why? Why do you think? He wants you to hear something that will affect your life. Now, to prepare Peter's heart for what's about to happen, God arranges a vision for him. But even before that, you have to know where he's staying. He's staying at a Simon the tanner's home. How is that significant? Well, he's softening Peter's heart even then because though Simon was a Jew, he was considered unclean because of his profession. So he's staying in Simon the tanner's house, who's already an unclean Jew, because a tanner was in a perpetual state of uncleanness because he handled dead animal carcasses, treating them with noxious mixtures of harsh chemicals and animal and human waste. Yuck! Whatever flesh was left on the hides was left to rot, and the stench would stay on the tanner's clothes, skin, and home. This was the original musk cologne. Because of this disgusting trade, rabbis put tanneries in the same category as bathhouses and public urinals. Jewish law lumped tanners in with those afflicted with boils or who collect dog excrement. I want to say this was not high. Tanners were not high on the social ladder. Tanning was also ranked alongside prostitution, dung collecting, gambling, and driving donkeys. So God is softening Peter's heart even then because he's with this guy who's unclean. But I hear no protest of him going to Simon the tanner. But now, as he's on this roof, a contingent of the ultimate unclean Gentiles are on their way. So Peter goes up on a roof. Why does he go up on a roof? Because it was flat, and in this culture could be used for many purposes like hanging up clothes, drying corn, hanging out, or because it was cooler, they slept up there. But a roof also had another purpose according to Solomon. Proverbs says, better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. And that's as far as I'm going to go with that one. But Peter went up there to pray because it was a quiet place. Verse 10, he became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. It's noon. It's lunchtime. So Peter's hungry, duh. And wouldn't you know it, he starts thinking about food. Pastor Dave Guzik says, it is often when we are engaged in spiritual activity that we often get physically hungry. We see that often on Sunday mornings. When God is at work and moving in a service, people often think about lunch. When is the preacher going to get through, they say. I can't take much more. Where are we going for lunch? Now, of course, he wasn't referring to this church because all eyes are fixed on the preacher, ears attuned to the providential word God is speaking to your hearts right now. Amen? God uses Peter's growling stomach to communicate an important vision while he falls into a trance. Verses 11 through 13. He saw heaven opened, and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." Ha! You didn't know God was a Texan, did you? It's possible that the four corners of the sheet represented the four corners of the earth, north, south, east, and west, where eventually the gospel would be going into all the world. On the sheet was a Noah's Ark of animals, clean and unclean. But you notice there's no fish on that sheet because they wouldn't be able to swim very well on a dry sheet, even in a vision. Why the vision, though, of clean and unclean animals? Well, God kept his people Israel separate from the surrounding pagan nations by having them adhere to certain dietary laws, thereby preventing them from having potlucks with their idolatrous neighbors. He wanted his people separate. Here's what it says in Leviticus 20. When was the last time you were in Leviticus? Most of you read Leviticus and stopped reading the Bible through a year in that point, didn't you? You must therefore, Leviticus 20 says, you must therefore make a distinction between clean and unclean animals and between unclean and clean birds. Do not defile yourselves by any animal or bird or anything that moves along the ground, those that I have set apart as unclean for you. Here's the reason why. You are to be holy to me because I, the Lord, am holy, and I have set you apart from the nations to be my own. Now, we do not live by those dietary laws anymore, but you can understand Peter's reluctance to go against everything he had lived by for his entire life. His entire life, he's not eating unclean food. He won't eat a shellfish or a piece of bacon because it was against the dietary laws. This would be like inviting a PETA activist to Ronnie's barbecue. They wouldn't want to go. They'd be offended. There is just no way this could happen because of long ingrained patterns of separation. But now with the new covenant in Jesus, God was calling a new people without dietary restrictions. There would no longer be kosher and non-kosher foods. Now, by the way, you're okay if you don't want to eat those foods or if you want to live under that dietary law of some sort. But why? I have a dietary law myself. I'm not going to eat rhubarb, beets, or liver. Not because they're unclean, because they're disgusting. Bigger than that, no longer would there be a distinction between clean and unclean food. There would no longer be a distinction between clean and unclean people. The lowered sheet was symbolic of Jews and Gentiles together for the gospel. Of course, Peter, being Peter, he told the Lord Jesus, no. No. He defiantly folded his arms, pinched his lips, dug in his heels, and said to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the ruler of the universe, the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, surely not, Lord. Peter replied in Acts 10:14, I have never eaten anything impure or unclean. Old Simon Peter had a habit of contradicting the Messiah. You know that, right? Remember when Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life? You know what Peter said? Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Remember the night before he was about to die and Jesus demonstrated to the disciples the full extent of his love by washing their feet? What did Peter say? He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you'll understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Not to mention the ultimate no when Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Whoever would say, surely not, should never add the word Lord, because he ain't then. Let me ask you, do you ever call him Lord then argue and fight and disobey him? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands because it's a human nature for us to do that. Do you ever call him Lord and then argue and fight? Jesus says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say?" Parents have an understanding of how hard God has it, right? We know that all the kids at Community Church of the Hills say, "Yes, Mom. Yes, Dad." Is there anything more? Huh? Why are you laughing? Do I have my congregation read wrong? A new believer had to make a choice to obey God by going to the mission field or continuing in a rewarding and comfortable business position. To help him, he consulted a veteran missionary. He explained how God clearly called him and yet how hard it was to make the choice to go. The missionary opened his Bible at this passage and pointed out to the new believer Peter's words, "Surely not, Lord." The missionary explained, "You just cannot say that. It is either surely not or it is Lord. The two words put together are a contradiction in terms." The missionary explained, "You just cannot say that." "Now then," he continued, "take my Bible and take this pencil, sit down and pray about it. Then cross out surely not and leave the word Lord, or cross out the word Lord and leave the words surely not. You can't have it both ways. Can't have it both ways." Let me ask you, is your habit consistently yes, Lord, or no, Lord? If it's consistent that you say no, Lord, simply take off one word and just say no. No. But with great enthusiasm, say yes, Lord. Verses 15 and 16, the voice spoke to him a second time, "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. It seems that Peter kept resisting. So, no, the sheet comes down a second time. No, the third time it comes down. And finally, Peter gets it. He had obviously forgotten Jesus' teaching. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them. What comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them. That makes sense, right? You can eat anything you want, but it isn't what we eat that defiles us. It isn't what we eat that makes it a sin. It's what's coming out of our mouth. Who knows what comes out of our mouth? Lying, blasphemies, insults, discouraging words. All of those come out of a person's mouth. Is there something in your life God wants you to change? Is there something in your life that God wants you to repent of? Where is he calling you to deny yourself and obey? You know, Jesus said, if you're going to come after me, if you're going to follow me, you've got to deny yourself and pick up your cross daily and follow me. The Bible's full of suggestions like that, right? Another suggestion, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. It's a great suggestion. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Another wonderful suggestion. I love the way God uses hyperbole. He doesn't really mean any of that literally, does he? So sadly, many Christians look at Jesus' words and look at those as suggestions. And we all know the great suggestion, right? Go into all the world and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded. The great suggestion. Why do I call it the great suggestion? Because very few take Jesus up on what is really known as the Great Commission. Yes, Lord, or no, Lord? Where is he calling you to deny yourself and obey? Is there a secret sin you're holding on to? A secret prejudicial attitude. Confession. I was in Austin, and I saw a blue-haired lady, and I realized I'm prejudiced against that. Just now, blue hair, why? How stupid. She's a human being. But that's this ingrained sense of self-righteousness that I have, right? People look different these days. Have you noticed? Not everyone looks like Johnson City. Go out in the city, there's all types of people. And I want to say hi, but I just find that little tweak in my heart. And yes, Lord, you're right. I do have a prejudice. Why? She didn't do anything to me. Green hair, blue hair, purple hair. They're all weird, but God loves them. And he's changing my heart to love them more, where that prejudicial attitude won't be in my heart anymore. None of you guys can relate, can you? Is your habit consistently yes, Lord, or no, Lord? Scottish preacher Alexander White said that we are a lot like Peter when we bundle up whole nations of men and throw them into that same unclean sheet. Whole churches that we know nothing about, but the bad names we have given them are in our sheet of excommunication also. All the other denominations of Christians in our land are common and unclean to us. Every party outside our own party in the political state also. Ooh! We have no language contemptuous enough wherewith to describe their wicked ways and their self-seeking schemes. They are four-footed beasts and creeping things. Indeed, there are very few men alive, and especially those who live near us, who are not sometimes in the sheet of our scorn, unless it is one here and one there of our own family or school or party. And they also come under our scorn and our contempt the moment they have a mind of their own, and interests of their own, and affections and ambitions of their own. I am convicted of that. Because of my own prejudices, preferences, and predilections, just like Peter. At a conference in Austin, God impressed on my heart that I needed to stop whining and complaining about people, but pray for them. Search your hearts too. We're a lot like Peter. So God finishes giving his revelation. How will Peter respond? Verses 17 to 21. While Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. They called out, asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, you can imagine he's thinking, what the heck did I just see? The Spirit said to him, Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them. Peter went down and said to the men, I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come? Peter responds in obedience. Aren't you glad God is patient with us? Aren't you glad that God reminds us and teaches us and preaches to us and reminds us again? Because Peter obeyed, because he let God shake his categories, because he crossed out surely not and left the word Lord, God used him to fulfill his purposes in getting the whole word to the whole world. We do well to follow Peter's example and obey. Wouldn't you agree? Would you agree? How about today? It started with a deliberate desire to seek God by getting away to a quiet place, a rooftop, to hear from him. How important it is that we get alone time with God so that we can hear from him. We saw that God overcame Peter's reluctance to interact with people not like him. That's what this is about. The whole point is this. God overcame Peter's reluctance, his bias, his prejudice to interact with people not like him. People he once scorned as unclean, but he was willing to change after God revealed to him a greater truth. Perhaps God has revealed to you a greater truth. This is something that takes meditation and introspection to see where our prejudices are. Because they come in many forms and they're all ugly. You know, I learned just about a year or two ago that Dripping Springs was a sundowner town. The librarian told me that. In the 50s. In the 50s. You know what a sundowner town is? All people of color had to be out of Dripping Springs before the sun went down. That's just as recently as the 50s. So where is God speaking to your heart today about accepting people different from you? I'm going to invite the worship team up here right now. And as they quietly play, I want us to reflect on what we heard for a minute or so. Then I'll close us in prayer. Think about how God spoke to your heart today. Close your eyes. Just listen to them play instrumentally. Then I'll close us. You know how we're made. You know our biases, prejudices, things we like and don't like. It affects how we treat others. But it's your will to love one another. Far beyond that, you say love our enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who mistreat you. Do that work in our heart so that we can be effective witnesses for you, so people will see Jesus in us, be drawn to him. Thank you, Lord. Stand and worship him one more time.
You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. in our